The Christmas season is upon us, and President Donald Trump may have just gifted all of America one of the best Christmas gifts ever in the form of his new national security strategy. That's going to be the top story that I'm going to cover today. I've read it. I love what I see in it, though it is causing dissent and, quite honestly, a lot of amusing panic amongst some factions here in America. Also, we're going to get into this whole Venezuelan drug boat double tap scandal, and I'm going to dive into what I think is actually going on here when it comes to Venezuela, as well as what's going on here with how the media is reporting on it. They're not being honest. And there's a lot more to the Venezuelan story that ties in with this new national security strategy. All of the dots will be connected for you in the entirety of this video. I can promise you that. And then finally, I'm going to discuss this whole free speech issue. The European Union is at war against the free speech of not just their own citizens, but now they're dangerously coming close to declaring war against Americans' free speech. And it all hinges off of the actions of what Elon Musk is doing with X. I'll get into that and all the rest right here, right now on American Advocates. The Venezuelan drug boats. It's causing quite a scandal here within America, mainly because of puss boy liberal men and women, of course, who can't stand to watch a president make decisive actions when it comes to protecting America. And you just hear all of the most nonsensical arguments when it comes to what the Trump administration is doing down there and how these boats are just fishermen and how Trump can't declare war without Congress and how Trump is an international war criminal. I'm going to connect all the dots for you right here. I'm going to explain how and why, first and foremost, everything President Donald Trump is doing right now, he is well within his rights to be doing. And then on top of it, I'm going to go into my theory on what's happening here, as well as what we can expect in the future, possibly after the midterms, actually, because I do think that there is some sort of a sinister motive here when it comes to the liberal media, as well as the Democrat Party as a whole. But what I want to do is address some common myths here and some even more common liberal misinformation when it comes to these Venezuelan drug boat kinetic strikes. First and foremost, when it comes to these puss boy liberals out here, they love to say, well, even if they're not fishermen, let's say that they are actually drug dealers on a drug boat. Trump can't just declare war on them. Only Congress can do that. The Trump administration has explicitly declared an armed conflict with the drug cartels, which are now designated as foreign terrorist organizations by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And it's so important for people to understand this because somehow most people missed this notion. I actually remember being incredibly excited. Back on February 20th, I believe it was, of this year, 2025, Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, promptly designated all Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorists, meaning that they are now officially recognized as enemies to America, enemies to the United States. And this allows the Trump administration to take the kid gloves off when it comes to dealing with them. No longer is the military and the Coast Guard required to chase down these speedboats and detain them and search the boats to see if there's any drugs on them. No. Once they're declared a terrorist, and once the Trump administration has declared an armed conflict, not a war, but an armed conflict, learn the term, do the research, he can now execute these strikes all in the name of defense of the American people, which is exactly what's happening here. And on top of that, there are plenty of U.S. laws and codes in place that allow President Donald Trump to conduct these strikes on perceived enemies. This is why his title is the Commander-in-Chief. He literally is in control as the executive branch of our United States military. Congress is not in control of that, not like the president is. Congress can declare war, yes, but an armed conflict is not war. We are not at war with South America or even with Venezuela, for that matter. But we are in an armed conflict with narco-terrorists who continue to ship poison to America. I want to point out perhaps the most important thing to look at when it comes to all of this. Article 2, Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia of these several states. When called into the actual service of the United States, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And to summarize all of that for you, again, when it comes to these drug boat strikes, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution vests the president with the authority as commander-in-chief to direct military forces, including the unilateral use of force that we're seeing when it comes to these drug boats for limited operations, all in the name of the national self-defense that I'm trying to tell you that's going on here. When it comes to narco-terrorism, which is a term that we have now coined thanks in part to President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio declaring the cartels as terrorists. And all of this can be done without needing prior congressional approval. Of course, if you're a liberal, hearing that makes you just want to throw a temper tantrum. You want to just shit in your diaper and cry and kick your legs up in the air. President Donald Trump can't do that. I've got news for you. The commander-in-chief in the executive branch is literally the most powerful branch and position in America for a reason. It is the one that Americans are most responsible for when it comes to directly voting in the leader who speaks and acts on behalf of the people. And that is, like it or not, President Donald Trump. And, like it or not, immigration reform, immigration policy, and the southern border in general, South America, Central America, it is popular overall what President Donald Trump is doing. Now, of course, a regime change in Venezuela is very unpopular. Only a 16% approval of that. I myself don't approve of a regime change in Venezuela either. But when it comes to popping off drug boats like this, I'm all for it. And if they want to persist in sending these boats out, these speed boats, mind you, that are rigged up with 3 to 4 aftermarket speed motors that cost roughly $75,000 to $150,000 a piece, making these boats total worth sometimes more than 250 grand, something a humble Venezuelan fisherman no doubt would not be able to afford, then I'm all for that as well. If they're going to keep sending the boats out filled with poison and gasoline, then yes, they literally deserve to be blown up. And it puts a smile on my face every time I see it. That's what it looks like to put America first and keep Americans safe. I also have some notes here. 10 U.S. Code 124 designates the Department of War as the lead federal agency for detecting and monitoring aerial and maritime transit of illegal drugs and authorizes military operations in international waters to interdict such threats, which can extend to kinetic strikes under presidential action. Because you also hear this too. Well, he's an international war criminal and those are international waters. Guess what? It's the Western Hemisphere, and America is the dominant empire presiding over the West. These are our waters, all of it. That's why we renamed that Gulf down there to the Gulf of America, because it's ours, and we're overseeing the West. And later on in this episode, I am going to get in to Trump's national security strategy, which proclaims that and triples down on that notion. It's glorious. Nevertheless, President Donald Trump is well within his rights to be carrying out these strikes. That's the point that I'm getting at here. Now to address if you can or cannot strike a drug boat twice, because that's the latest scandal that the Democrat mainstream media and Democrat politicians and even some stupid Republican politicians are all gathering behind. Well, striking about once is fine, but twice, that's just excessive. And now that does make them war criminals. Wrong. Because once again, this is an armed conflict and not a war, and the laws of armed conflict permit follow-up strikes on legitimate military objectives if the initial attack fails to neutralize the threat. And the craziest reality of all of this is those secondary strikes are allowed to be carried out even if it does mean that it harms potential shipwrecked survivors, so long as the strike is proportional to the military objective, which in this case is to sink the threat. And that threat is the drug boat full of poison that's killing Americans. And what wound up happening on that day, about 3 months ago now, was that the first initial strike, which usually sinks the boats, happened to not sink that boat. Apparently, according to reports, there were 2 shipwrecked narco-terrorists hanging off the side of the boat. Of course they were. They were clinging on for dear life. But at the end of the day, they're narco-terrorist scum, and the boat was still floating. And these narco-terrorists are set with one objective: to carry it out, to finish the mission, to finish transporting the poison to wherever it needs to go. So seeing this, the military decided they needed a secondary strike to sink the boat. That's the military objective, and that's proportionate force, well within their rights to be doing so. Unfortunately for the shipwreck survivors, it meant killing them as well. Are we supposed to sit here, though, and feel sad? The Democrat Party is so beyond that at this point, they now literally want you to feel pity for drug dealers, for Venezuelan cartel members. I say that. I have absolutely no pity for these people. And beyond that, I'll take it a step further and I'll tell you, I'm glad they're gone. And the thing is, in the 2023 Department of Defense, which is now the Department of War, Law of War Manual, Section 5.5 clearly states that anti-terrorist military objectives may be attacked, including with follow-up strikes, until neutralized, as long as incidental harm to protected persons is not excessive relative to the concrete military advantage. The manual implies that secondary strikes are permissible if threats persist. For instance, like a drug boat that wasn't destroyed by the first strike. And of course, in this case, the objective is the complete destruction of the drug boat, not necessarily, though, the death of the crew. And so that's it. The manual permits it. Pete Hegseth is well within his rights to carry out these orders. And President Donald Trump is well within his rights as the executive to literally not ask Congress to engage with these narco-terrorists, because it's not an act of war, it's an act of an armed conflict. I hope that informs all of you of what's really going on here and why none of this should come back to bite this current Trump administration. However, there may be some trouble on the horizon for the Trump administration in general, because now we're seeing the articles, probably no thanks to the liberal mainstream media here that loved perpetuating the lie that these were possibly fishermen on fishing boats. Again, speedboats worth $250,000 with 4 motors attached on the back of them. I've never seen a fisherman use a boat like that. But according to articles now, a Colombian family of a fisherman killed in the U.S. boat strike has now filed a human rights complaint against the Trump administration, alleging that the United States government illegally killed him. And this Snopes article has the breakdown right here. Breaking down report of a man killed in Venezuelan drug boat strikes was actually a fisherman with 4 children, according to the report. Neither the U.S. nor Venezuelan officials have confirmed the identities of 17 people killed in 3 U.S. strikes on alleged drug trafficking vessels. Though the Trump administration identified the 17 victims of the strikes as narco-terrorists in late September 2025, a claim that's now archived has circulated online that one of the people killed was actually a fisherman with 4 children who, according to his wife, left one day for work and never came back. However, at the time of this writing, neither the U.S. nor Venezuelan government or news media has publicly identified the 17 people killed in the September strikes. Venezuela's interior minister and ruling party head said on state TV after the first strike that none of the 11 people killed was a Tren de Aragua member. Of course they said that. That's the Venezuelan government. Cabello claimed that investigators had spoken to the people in the victims' towns without naming those towns, who said none were from Tren de Aragua. None were drug traffickers. And of course, I gotta say this, if you're a liberal right now watching that or reading that article at any point in time, I'm sure you're eating that up by the spoonful, you easily gaslit pleb. You see that? The very not corrupt and very trustworthy foreign Venezuelan government has told us that none of the people struck were drug cartel members. They weren't Tren de Aragua. They were just fishermen. How do you know? And when you ask these people, how do you know that? The Venezuelan government said so. I mean, give me a break. Given the anonymous nature of the interview in the New York Times, Snopes could not independently verify the alleged fisherman's wife's account. Go figure. We did not find the reported interviews of others or others like it featured elsewhere in searches of English or Spanish language and Venezuelan media to corroborate the New York Times account. We reached out to Julie Turkowitz, the author of the New York Times report, to ask if she carried out the interview and, if so, how she verified the alleged fisherman's wife's identity. We are still awaiting a reply. And that is Snopes basically debunking these claims, for now at least, when it comes to that. These are just claims, mind you, because it's very obvious to anybody the difference, like I said, between a narco-terrorist drug boat, which is this, by the way. That's a narco-terrorist drug boat if I've ever seen one. 3 motors attached on the back of it with barrels of gasoline to be able to make long trips. And what's hiding in that boat? Very likely drugs. And each of those motors, I've got to emphasize, are anywhere between $75,000 to $150,000 a piece, plus the cost of the boat, plus the cost of the gas, the barrels, everything. So you cannot tell me that this is a humble Venezuelan fishing boat. They literally can't afford this. Most Americans wouldn't be able to afford a boat of this caliber. And we've been striking down dozens of these boats. If Venezuelan fishermen are seriously that rich, I'm going to move down there tomorrow and start fishing in Venezuela. I'll be a millionaire in like 5 years at that rate then. But the fact of the matter is, they're not that rich. This is what a fishing boat actually looks like, okay? It's very different. It barely has the same shape. It's made out of an entirely different material. It's much smaller, and you'll notice on these boats that it either has one motor or no motors, depending. But like I said, it doesn't matter what the facts are here. There is a serious, sinister motive here when it comes to the liberal mainstream media and the Democrat Party as a whole, tossing in some Republicans as well, like I said, because what's actually happening here, in my opinion, is the Democrat Party laying the foundations for a future President Donald Trump impeachment. The midterms may not go very well for the Republicans. I've addressed that in recent videos. Of course, my mostly boomer Republican audience does not want to hear what I have to say on that. Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is, Trump is not doing a good enough job when it comes to our current economic situation, and he is tanking in popularity and approval on most polls. If that continues to happen, I don't care if Louisiana versus Calais does pass the Supreme Court and racial gerrymandering ends and Republicans gain 19 seats. I don't care that Texas successfully redistricted their entire state and gained 5 Republican seats. I don't care that Indiana is passing legislation to gain 1 or 2 additional seats, or any other state for that matter. That's all great news potentially, but the fact of the matter is economic populism wins elections, and if the cost of living crisis and affordability is not fixed by this time next year, I do genuinely believe the GOP will lose the House of Representatives and the Democrats will take control. And once they have control, articles of impeachment will be filed on President Donald Trump. That's been their promise ever since last November when Trump was declared the president-elect of the United States. The Democrats have made it clear that their only purpose right now, their only reason to exist, is not to help Americans. It's not to work in a bipartisan fashion to pass beneficial laws. It's literally to lie in wait and impeach President Donald Trump the moment they regain power. That is what they're all about. And if the Republicans lose the House next year, the Democrats will be able to do so. Now you throw in a scandal like what we're seeing when it comes to Venezuela and these drug boats, and the Democrats have actual ammunition to load up their impeachment gun and press forward on it. And to make matters worse, there are some Republican news outlets out there that are even backing this notion that Trump is now an international war criminal.
It gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these 2 people.
Now, that was a report from Newsmax, which I believe is a pretty right-wing conservative news source most of the time. And it's patently false. Because earlier in this video, I demonstrated to you why the Trump administration and Pete Hegseth are well within their rights to carry out secondary strikes on these boats if needed. Nevertheless, this is the prevalent narrative that the Democrats are going to ride all the way to the midterms next year and through them if they regain control of the House. This will be the first shot fired in the proverbial political civil war that will be waged if Democrats do take the House and start pushing towards impeachment. We also have this idiot, Senator Rand Paul, who is also backing this notion already. This was a letter from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the United States Coast Guard to Senator Rand Paul in response to your letter dated October 6, 2025, regarding the Coast Guard's efforts to interdict illicit drugs headed towards the United States since September 1st of 2024. I offer the following. From September 1st, 2024 to October 7th, 2025, Coast Guard surface assets operating under Coast Guard Law Enforcement Authority indicted 212 suspected drug smuggling vessels at sea headed towards the United States. Of the 212 interdictions, 41 vessels had no illicit contraband on board. 24 of those 41 vessels without contraband did not appear to commit any federal criminal offense. And so the problem here is Rand Paul is all too happy to tweet this out, stating the Coast Guard records show that prior to the reign of blow them to smithereens, 21% of boats stopped off the coast of Venezuela possessed no drugs. And so I think it's pretty clear to see what's happening here. Like I said, that foundation for impeachment is being laid, even if the ground that the foundation is being built on is shaky and false. And so that's going to be something for the Trump administration to look out for. My honest hope is that the Republicans keep control of the House and that Trump figures out a way to become the economic populist that he once was. He needs to focus on the cost of living and affordability, and we need to get tangible results in the form of lower grocery costs, lower rent perhaps, a more affordable housing market, and cheaper gasoline even. If that doesn't happen, though, the House is gone, impeachment's coming, and this is going to be the main way that they do it. I also want to state this too. To wrap up this first segment, what's happening in Venezuela is much more than meets the eye. The war on drugs is a very noble cause, protecting Americans' health, protecting them in a case like this from themselves, essentially, because that's another argument. Americans are going to buy drugs anyway. Well, that doesn't mean we just let them ship the poison into the United States, does it? It's a noble cause, but there is much more happening here than meets the eye. And when it comes to what the Democrats are doing, they are pointing out what appears to be hypocrisy. And I kind of agree with what was said in this segment right here.
We also know, writ large, that the story about this administration being focused on eradicating American society of drugs is absolute BS, because Donald Trump went and pardoned, he's walking free now, the former Honduran president who trafficked 400 tons of cocaine into America. Why did he get to leave prison early? He had a 45-year sentence, which, by the way, Trump administration #1 prosecuted him because Roger Stone is his buddy, and because he wrote Donald Trump a letter calling him Your Excellency and saying that they shared conservative values. The problem is the story is changing every 10 minutes.
Unfortunately, it is pretty hard to argue against that, because why did Trump pardon someone who's ultimately responsible for producing 400 tons of cocaine? Not a great image, in my opinion. Nevertheless, I bring up that segment to actually fortify my position on this when it comes to the Trump administration and the Venezuelan drug boats. This is not actually a war on drugs, despite what they want you to think. And the mainstream media is all enwrapped in that. That's what they're entirely focused on. These drug boats, the pardoned criminal who produced 400 tons of cocaine, Maduro, regime change, all of that. And all of that is very real in a sense, but it really is a front for something deeper. Now, of course, some people educate themselves a little bit more than the mainstream media, and so they point to stuff like this. This was a text message exchange between Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon in 2018. You can see in the message exchange, it says, Venezuela, more oil reserves than Saudi. And even more so, there's an undeniable narrative that's already been put out there by President Donald Trump himself in the past.
Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
That's right. Oil. And I got to say this as an American fresh off of reading the new Monroe Doctrine 2.0 that the Trump administration put out in regards to their new national security strategy. I'm all in favor of it. This is, like I said earlier, our Western Hemisphere. And so I'm okay with it. We can and should use Venezuelans' resources for our benefit. We're the superior country. But if you think it stops at just America's lust for oil and resources, it really doesn't. I am bringing this up now to let you know that later on in this episode, I'm going to go much deeper into how important that Venezuelan oil is, because other countries are meddling in the affairs of Venezuela. Other countries have a deep-seated interest in Venezuela for much more sinister reasons. And when I inform you of that truth and what's going on actually in Venezuela, it will change your entire outlook on these Venezuelan drug boat strikes. Because truthfully, what the Trump administration is doing, centered around the Gulf of America, the Caribbean region, and Venezuela in general, is perhaps one of the most important things that the Trump administration will do during the entirety of its term. Be sure to give this video a like, subscribe for more content like this, and stay tuned for later on in this episode for the remainder of that information when I begin to break down Trump's new national security strategy. Because yes, Venezuela plays a massive part in that too. But before I get to that, I want to cover something else incredibly important taking place across the world right now that also deals with the new Monroe Doctrine 2.0, the new national security strategy. And that is the blatant assault and attack on free speech, not just in European countries, but possibly on American citizens as well.
Yes, I think as a general rule, you can tell which side is the good side and which side is the bad side by which side wishes to restrict freedom of speech. That's one of the signs that they are the bad guys.
So the key takeaway there, of course, is that the Liberal Party is wicked and evil because they hate free speech. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to American Advocates for more. All right, obviously, I'm just playing there. The real key takeaway there is what's happening when it comes to the European Union right now and the platform X, formerly known as Twitter, owned by Elon Musk. This Business Insider article highlights this. Elon Musk's X fined $140 million by the European Union over deceptive blue check marks. And it's not actually over deceptive blue check marks. That's the EU's weaselly way of being able to wage war against Elon Musk for not promoting censorship on his X platform and not restricting free speech at the request of these sinister, uber liberal, disgusting European countries. That's what they're really after. Elon Musk won't cater to them. And so they want to punish him with this $140 million fine, of course. But they don't want to outright say, we're fining you for not censoring free speech, because that makes them look like absolute dicks. And so instead, they're waging war on his blue checkmark system. According to the European Union, it is too easy to be able to gain a blue checkmark, and they just can't stand that. So they're going to fine him $140 million. That's the story they're going with. The European Union said on Friday it had issued a fine of 120 million euros, $140 million to X over a number of violations, including the deceptive design of the site's blue checkmarks. Earlier on Friday, Musk reposted an X post from the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who warned the European Union against fining Musk's company and said the bloc should avoid attacking American companies over garbage. The European Union launched its investigation into X 2 years ago under its landmark Digital Services Act, or DSA. In its decision on Friday, the European Commission, the EU's regulatory arm, said the ability for anyone to pay for a verified checkmark makes it difficult for users to assess whether an account is authentic, leaving them open to scams and impersonation fraud. Give me a break. The Tesla CEO has been highly critical of the EU's attempts to regulate social media companies. Good for him. In response to a preliminary finding by the European Commission last year, Musk accused the regulator of censoring free speech and called the Digital Services Act misinformation. Do not be fooled by this. This is a war on free speech from the European Union. It's not about blue check marks. And how do I know this? It's because they had sent letters to Elon Musk that he did not keep confidential, that he blatantly plastered all over social media when he got them, where they were requesting him, before Trump was president at the time, I believe, they were requesting him to censor himself in his interview with President Donald Trump and to be careful with what information he allowed to be put out when it came to that interview. You can see here in this letter from the European Commission to Elon Musk, I am writing to you in context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform X of a live conversation between a U.S. presidential candidate and yourself, which will also be accessible to users in the European Union. In this context, I am compelled to remind you of the due diligence obligations set out in the Digital Services Act here in the European Union. As the individual entity ultimately controlling a platform with over 300 million users worldwide, of which 1/3 are in the EU, you have a legal obligation to ensure X's compliance with the European Union law, and in particular, the Digital Services Act in the European Union. This notably means ensuring, on one hand, that freedom of expression and information, including media freedom and pluralism, is effectively protected, and, on the other hand, that all proportionate and effective mitigation measures are put in place regarding the amplification of harmful content in connection with relevant events, including live streaming, which, if unaddressed, might increase the risk profile of X and generate detrimental effects on civic discourse and public security. This is important against the background of recent examples of public unrest brought about by the amplification of content that promotes hatred, disorder, incitement to violence, or certain instances of disinformation. And that right there is truthfully what it was all about and always has been about. They hate Elon Musk for buying X. They hate President Donald Trump for restoring America to glory, or at least attempting to. And they overall hate the conservative movement for protecting freedoms and liberties of its people. This is why over in these countries, some conservative politicians are blatantly jailed for their stances in politics. They continue to restrict free speech in their countries, the UK along with them. And they sent this letter out to Elon Musk before he was set to interview President Donald Trump to remind him that they consider what they call disinformation as very offensive and very dangerous to their society. You see, that's how they do it. That's how they restrict free speech. They label any speech they don't like as hatred, misinformation, or dangerous extreme rhetoric, when truthfully, none of it is. There's only one thing when it comes to free speech that should be outlawed, and that is using free speech to incite violence. That's the only time that I agree with restricting free speech. Otherwise, here on this channel, as an American advocate, I am completely a free speech absolutist. Now, of course, just like what we're seeing with anything else that people don't want to be popular, promoting it, making a big deal out of it, only serves to make it more popular. So Elon Musk is reporting that X is seeing record-breaking downloads now in many countries in Europe after the EU fined the company $140 million. Elon has, of course, also taken to social media many times over to tweet and retweet information that points to new statistics and data showing that X is now the #1 news source, not just in America anymore, but in dozens of countries worldwide. I wonder what the appeal could be. Could it be that you don't have to worry too much on X as opposed to all of these other social media platforms that hate your free speech? You don't have to worry about being banned for posting your opinions and beliefs. I wonder, is that why? Could that be why X is the #1 news source in all of these countries now? And if you don't believe me about the war on free speech happening in the United Kingdom and the European Union, just take a look at this.
A woman has been arrested by Cheshire Police in relation to an inaccurate information on social media.
Today, some other people have been given whopping great big terms in prison for social media posts.
I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online.
Scotland's new hate crime laws have come into force. Some people could be investigated by police if they misgender someone online.
How many people do you think were arrested in Britain for things they said on social media last year?
I have no idea.
3,300.
Really?
Police will be the source of truth and not social media.
It just continues to get worse and worse out on the front lines of what I call Western civilization, the United Kingdom and Europe. They truly do hate free speech, and they truly are a massive, overly liberal, radicalized collection of societies continuing to oppress their people more and more year by year. And if you think America is immune to this, think again.
The U.S. is a tough one because, you know, we have the notion of the First Amendment.
There are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda, and whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence.
If people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block. It's really hard to govern today.
So my biggest concern is that your view
has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways?
The First Amendment is not absolute. It does not protect any single thing anyone says.
That is why this is so important. And that is why it is so important that the Trump administration take this battle to the European Union. I don't for the life of me understand why any of the big tech companies, all of which, by the way, or most of which certainly, are founded here in America. Why is Facebook beholden to European Union laws? X, why are they beholden to these laws? If I was Elon Musk, I wouldn't pay the fine. And in fact, I would pull X out of the European Union entirely. All social media platforms should follow suit on that. Any country that reaches out to these platforms and tries to dictate to them how they run things, what they censor or don't censor, including Americans, should pull out of that country immediately. Watch what happens if companies start doing that. You will see a full-scale revolt from the citizens of those countries attempting to censor us and continuing to censor their own people. It's already happened in some other third world countries where their government established power and then attempted to restrict free speech, attempted to ban social media in some cases. It led to actual revolts. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed this issue on X the other day. The European Commission's $140 million fine isn't just an attack on X, it's an attack on all American tech platforms and the American people by foreign governments. The days of censoring Americans online are over. Furthermore, President Donald Trump's new national security strategy actually has addressed this. In it, it states that continental Europe has been losing share of global GDP, down from 25% in 1990 to just 14% today. It also states the economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. That is, of course, due to their ridiculously stupid immigration policies out there. The larger issue facing Europe includes activities of the European Union and other transnational bodies that undermine political liberty and sovereignty. And it goes on to state that should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in just 20 years' time or less. It's a real and dangerous threat, and I'm going to cover that new national security strategy as my top story up next, tying it back into the Venezuelan drug boats and bridging the gap right now, as well as bridging the gap on this whole free speech crisis, because it covers all of that. It's truly the best gift President Donald Trump could have given Americans for Christmas this year. But in regards to the European Union, they have made a $140 million mistake that the Trump administration is not going to let go. Neither will Elon Musk. And it's only going to come back to bite them. If you agree with that statement, be sure to subscribe right now to American Advocates for more. Leave a comment down below on what your thoughts are on all of this. How should the Trump administration handle this? How should big tech handle this? Do you agree with my statement? Should big tech pull out of these countries to make the ultimate statement? If not, what should they do? Let me know, and thanks so much for watching. On to the final story, the top story, the Don Roe Doctrine, Trump's vision for the entire Western Hemisphere. I love this cover of the New York Post. And like I've been stating all episode long, truly, during this Christmas season, the best gift President Donald Trump could have gifted to America. Finally, a step in the right direction once again from this administration. Finally, something that is actually going to come across as popular to most American people. This should help his approval rating thoroughly. I am, of course, seeing a lot of panic centered around this doctrine. A lot of people aren't going to like it either, but those are the typical low IQ liberals or old school Republicans, the neocon warmongers, of course. All of the real America First Americans will wind up approving of this new national security strategy overall, and I'm going to explain to you why. But first, I want to briefly show you this. This is a summary of what the Monroe Doctrine was. And you need to understand what this is, because this new national security strategy, being dubbed the Don Roe Doctrine for a reason, is eerily reminiscent of what the Monroe Doctrine was hundreds of years ago. And the Monroe Doctrine is a United States foreign policy position that opposes European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. It holds that any intervention in the political affairs of the Americas by foreign powers is a potentially hostile act against the United States. The doctrine was central to American grand strategy in the 20th century. President James Monroe first articulated the doctrine on December 2nd of 1823 during his 7th annual State of the Union address to Congress. Essentially, to make matters very clear, in 1823, President James Monroe decided everything in this Western Hemisphere is established enough and good enough. As the United States, the supreme power of the West, we will no longer tolerate any foreign interference or activity on the Western Hemisphere, and that goes for South America and all of North America, including Canada. And while it specifically cites European countries, it goes for the entirety of the East. And this is just how power works, by the way. The United States truly is the world's greatest superpower, and we truly do operate as an empire. It doesn't matter how much you want to insist civilization has progressed beyond the Middle Ages or before, there are still very real empires in today's world, and the United States is the top tier one. We control the West. We oversee the West. South America, Central America, that's our backyard. And so we need to keep an eye on everything that's happening there, and very rightfully so, as proclaimed in the Monroe Doctrine, any activity from European countries or any country in the East should be looked at as a potential threat to us. Over time, though, we got very lax on this doctrine. We eased up. We didn't want to create unnecessary tensions, and we allowed a lot of countries to get away with way too much. And so that's where the Monroe Doctrine comes back into play. This is an official statement on this from whitehouse.gov, America 250 presidential message on the anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. This was put out 5 days ago on December 2nd, which was the 202nd anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine. On December 2nd, 1823, the doctrine of American sovereignty was immortalized when President James Monroe declared before the nation a simple truth that has echoed throughout the ages. The United States will never waver in defense of our homeland, our interests, or the well-being of our citizens. Today, my administration proudly reaffirms this promise under a new Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, that the American people, not foreign nations nor globalist institutions, will always control their own destiny in our hemisphere. Not just in our nation, our hemisphere. We control the West. In the centuries since, President Monroe's doctrine of sovereignty has guarded the American continents against communism, fascism, and foreign infringement. And as the 47th President of the United States, I am proudly reasserting this time-honored policy. Since I took office, I have aggressively pursued an America First policy of peace through strength. We restored U.S. privileged access through the Panama Canal. We are reestablishing American maritime dominance. We are disrupting non-market practices in the international supply chain and logistics sectors. And you know, for all the flack that he got for focusing on the Panama Canal and China's control over that, which blatantly was done in opposition to the Monroe Doctrine, it's all starting to make sense. Not to mention President Donald Trump's unique focus on Greenland, which is something I also approve of heavily. I believe America should absolutely acquire Greenland, and I am in favor of Trump's decision to retake the Panama Canal. But it goes on even further than that. My administration is also halting the flow of deadly drugs flowing through Mexico, ending the invasion of illegal aliens along our southern border, and dismantling narco-terrorist networks all across the Western Hemisphere. To defend our nation's workers and industries, I recently secured historic trade deals with El Salvador, Argentina, Ecuador, and Guatemala, allowing greater and more streamlined market access. I reinvigorated my Trump corollary. The Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, and American leadership is coming roaring back stronger than ever before. Today, we renew our pledge to always uphold American sovereignty, security, and safety first. Above all, we vow to protect our cherished national legacy of Republican self-government against all threats, foreign and domestic. And so, like I said, the best Christmas gift he could have given us, because most importantly, this new Monroe Doctrine, Trump's new national security strategy, officially establishes the Western Hemisphere now as America's #1 foreign policy priority. You can see here it says the United States must reconsider our military presence in the Western Hemisphere. This means 4 obvious things: a readjustment of our global military presence to address urgent threats in our hemisphere, especially the missions identified in this strategy, and away from theaters whose relative import to American national security has declined in recent decades or years. This is, of course, in reference to all of those other foreign wars that we've just had to stick our nose in. The foreign policy of America has been the undoing of both political parties time and time again. Democrats and Republicans alike embrace the same nearly identical oftentimes foreign policy when it comes to America policing the world. And young Americans are sick of this because this strategy has been adopted by America for decades now and has ultimately led to no good, tangible results. Regime change doesn't work. Us meddling in other countries' foreign affairs and wars rarely yields the results that we want. Even the ones that Trump has settled has been, in my view, a colossal waste of time. Because I'll be frank with you, as an American, I don't actually give a about the Congo or Rwanda. It's a nice thought to know that President Donald Trump played a major part in establishing peace and ending a 30-year civil war there that resulted in the death of millions of people in the Congo. That's nice. And I know Trump was really vying for that Nobel Peace Prize. He was never going to get it, though. And so now, can we finally stop focusing so much on Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, Rwanda, Congo, Thailand, Cambodia? That's the messaging here. And essentially, I view this as the Trump administration responding and saying, we hear you, and we're actually going to listen and enact real change. And thank God for that. It goes on to make more bullet points stating a more suitable Coast Guard and Navy presence to control sea lanes to thwart illegal and other unwanted migration and to reduce human and drug trafficking and to control key transit routes in a crisis. It says it targets deployments to secure the border and defeat cartels, including where necessary, the use of lethal force to replace the failed law enforcement only strategy of the last several decades. And it also establishes or expands access in strategically important locations. It then states the United States will prioritize commercial diplomacy to strengthen our own economy and industries using tariffs and reciprocal trade agreements as powerful tools. The goal is for our partner nations to build up their domestic economies while an economically stronger and more sophisticated Western Hemisphere becomes an increasingly attractive market for American commerce and investment. So to summarize that up super fast, essentially, less foreign wars engagement, less sticking our nose in the Eastern Hemisphere, less policing the Eastern Hemisphere, less worrying about Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Russia, Gaza, Cambodia, Thailand, and more focusing on our Western Hemisphere, more protecting Americans from cartels, more focusing on fortifying America, more focusing on industry here in America, more focusing on fair trade using tariffs. This is such good news. But of course, the Democrats love to tell you how this is going to benefit Russia, and they love pointing to how the Kremlin is celebrating this new national security strategy from President Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin is a much happier guy, I think, after this was announced. You can actually see here in an article from that eastern half of the region, it says the Kremlin says U.S. national security strategy document largely consistent with Russia's vision. Spokesman Peskov says Moscow hopes this could be a modest guarantee that they'll be able to continue joint constructive work on finding settlement in Ukraine. The adjustments we're seeing, I'd say, are largely consistent with our vision, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told Russian journalist Pavel Zarubin in an interview, a fragment of which was shared on his Telegram on Sunday. He further argued that U.S. President Donald Trump's domestic political position is strong, which allows him to adjust the country's national security strategy to suit his vision. Peskov also said that Russia supports the language in the document, which he said contains statements against confrontation and in favor of dialogue and building good relations. And that might freak out so many people, but I got to admit to you right now, I have long been an advocate for America to repair its relationship to Russia. I don't give a damn about Ukraine. The more I study the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the more I begin to understand what's actually happening there. Ukraine is a split country. It's not just a war-torn country. It's split because it borders both Europe and Russia. The western part of Ukraine wants to be identified as a European country, and therefore, of course, they also kind of want to sneak their way into NATO protection. Meanwhile, the eastern part of Ukraine, from everything I've researched, is close to Russia and actually identifies more with Russian culture. And that's really what this war is all about. And I say, as an American who is struggling in this American economy still, I say we remove ourselves from that conflict overall and we let it play out the way that it's going to play out. I don't like seeing President Donald Trump spend too much time on this topic. I know he campaigned on it, but I never believed that campaign promise. Trump is Trump. He's always going to overpromise and overestimate his abilities. And certainly, oftentimes, he comes through. This is not one of those instances, but I think most Americans, except for the Democrats that look for any reason to hate him and try to make him look bad, I actually think most Americans would be okay with President Donald Trump admitting defeat, which he'll never do, but essentially admitting defeat and giving up on Ukraine and Russia. It's time we do that. And not only that, but it's time we actually, like I said, repair our relationship with Russia. What we've done by imposing so many sanctions on Russia and by refusing to trade with them is we've driven them right into the hands of China, which is our true enemy. And Russia and China don't like each other. They never have. They pretend to like each other on a global front, which scares a lot of Americans and other countries, but they don't like each other. And Russia has every reason to not like China. China is a scummy country. They steal the IP, they take advantage of other countries, they use their marketplaces, and they really, really are a bad ally. China is self-obsessed with itself and its own power, and they will use other countries to increase their own power, but they never look out for the best interest of other countries. Putin knows this. Russia knows this collectively, but they're forced to interact with China because we've sanctioned them into oblivion here on the American front over a stupid war. It needs to end. And by ending it, we allow Russia to come back to daddy Trump, come back to America. Work with us instead. It is a far better alternative than allowing Russia to continue its trade and to continue its relationship with China. They don't want to do it. And whether people realize it or not, China is actually pretty much one of the main central points of Trump's new national security strategy. Of course, America is the true central point here, the main focus. But dealing with China as a threat is all over in this new 33-page document. I'm going to go over that right now. And it does tie in to Venezuela. Trump's new national security strategy focuses on the peace through strength policies that he promised us. This 33-page document includes all kinds of information and plans going forward that demonstrate to us that Trump will be holding strong on his tariffs. It even goes so far as to state that President Donald Trump is looking to find a way to increase the projections from $30 trillion of generated tariff revenue by the 2030s to now $40 trillion of generated revenue by the 2030s. And of course, that'll be a time when Trump is out of office, which is what makes the upcoming 2028 election so damn important. Nevertheless, I love that this Donroe Doctrine continues to focus on tariffs. I'm a big fan of them, and they're still very controversial to this day. But the tariffs are crucial. The other countries were raking us over the coals, taking complete advantage of us in global trade, and it has to stop. And it has stopped because of President Trump and the Liberation Day tariffs. Keep them up, especially because if we can generate $40 trillion by sometime in the 2030s, probably the late 2030s, that could actually alleviate our national debt. I mean, that's more than what our national debt is currently. And our national debt is going up something like $4 trillion a year. It's out of control, and it has to be dealt with. I know the philosophy is, well, America's the greatest superpower and our dollar is tied with the petrodollar. And, we don't need to pay back our debt because we're on top. But the fact of the matter is that's a very dangerous risk to continually be taking. I personally, as a young American, am sick and tired of adopting boomer ideology and boomer politics when it comes to that. Pay down the national debt. It's out of control, and it is affecting our quality of life here as Americans. And that is where the Trump tariffs come into place. And that's also why I'm against these $2,000 stimulus checks being sent out just before the midterm elections next year. Trump wants to prove to Americans that the tariffs are working. I say, don't send out the $2,000 checks. You're never going to buy Democrats' votes. Instead, use all that money and start paying down the debt. People don't like that approach. I think it's the best one you can take. Another great listed point in Trump's new national security strategy is energy dominance. That is a declaration from this Trump administration. He wants to increase his focus on not just production, but literal energy domination. He's going to continue to drill the precious oil. The fact of the matter is America's sitting on tons and tons of oil. And we can and should be drilling for that on a continual basis. That will not only lower our gas costs here in America, but the act of drilling for that oil creates more American jobs, which are sorely needed right now. This new national security strategy also emphasizes perhaps the most important topic of the 21st century, which is, of course, big tech. Under this new national security plan, the United States is going to begin to claw back our original IP in tech that was stolen by Beijing and In regards to big tech, like I was just covering earlier this episode, Elon Musk, X, big tech, social media, his national security strategy torches Europe and the European Union for allowing open border immigration that resulted in their countries being flooded by Muslim immigrants who do not assimilate. Not to mention the fact that the EU is attempting to fine Elon Musk $140 million for not censoring its citizens on X. Parts of this NSS, national security strategy, is Trump literally waging war on European Union politics, uber liberal European politics. And rightfully so. The front lines of Western civilization over in the EU and the UK have diminished. They're barely recognizable as free Western countries anymore. They are openly censoring their citizens, stripping freedoms away, and they've always grandstanded against America anyway. I've always said this from the start. Are they really our allies? Perhaps behind closed doors they are, but what does it matter all that much when perception is reality? And on their media networks and on the global stage, they continually insult America and Americans, our president. They continually grandstand against us and make us out to be the bad guys. So I, for one, am happy that Trump is playing a no-nonsense hardball game against the European Union. And, of course, by doing such, this also puts NATO in jeopardy. And why is that? It's because NATO is a Eurocentric group, and America, truthfully, does not belong in NATO. There is an increasingly popular movement building within America right now, especially with young people, where the thought process is America should pull out of NATO. NATO takes advantage of America routinely. And under President Donald Trump, that has stopped, of course. But NATO, without America, is pretty much doomed. They need our money, yet they treat us, yet all of the countries collectively in NATO treat America like So let's see how they do without us. They're always screaming on the global stage, we don't want America meddling with our politics and our policies. America is everywhere in this world, and we can't stand it. We can't stand American influence. We just want to be left alone. Okay, granted. Now we're leaving you alone. Let's see what happens to you without American influence. Do you think it's going to get better over there? Do you think these European countries are going to stop censoring free speech now that America is removing its influence more and focusing more internally on itself as a country? You think they're going to say, well, that's all we really wanted. We just wanted America to pull out of our politics. Now that they've done that, you can say whatever you want on social media, anything you want, as long as you don't break the law. We're going to do away with hate speech now. Do you think that's how that's going to go? I don't think so. But back to the Western Hemisphere, the side that matters the most and always has. I want to take you back to Venezuela. In that first segment of this episode, I covered the Venezuelan drug boats. I covered how President Trump and Pete Hegseth were well within their rights to blow up those drug boats. And I covered how it's much more than that. Though the war on drugs is certainly a noble cause, it truly is more of a front than anything at all. And not an insidious conspiratorial front on the Trump administration's part, but a clever 3D chess level front. I am not one of those Republicans that is always telling other Republicans to trust the plan, patriots, trust the plan. Trump is playing 8D chess. You just can't see it. He isn't, not usually. Trump is very reactive, very adaptable, I think. Trump is not a 4D chess player. He doesn't brilliantly plan all of his strategies. But in this case, this particular case, I will argue that he is playing chess against China. And that's right. Like I've been saying this entire episode, China and Venezuela are directly linked. And Trump has had a much better track record against China than what the media would want you to realize. Trump is actually 3-0 against China right now. He scored his first point against China by implementing the Trump tariffs. He scored his second point in China when he dealt with Iran, which many people viewed as him bowing to Netanyahu. And I can almost assure you it went deeper than that. I am not in favor of boots on the ground in the Middle East or a regime change in Iran necessarily. I don't like that. I have Middle East fatigue. Nevertheless, Iran and China are linked. And then he's now 3-0 against China because Venezuela and China are linked. You see, reports have come in. Something like 10,000 aircraft carriers and military ships are now in the Caribbean Sea. That's like a third of our naval force, I believe. On top of that, we have somewhere around 8,000 United States military soldiers in the sea. And the Trump administration has just approved undercover CIA lethal missions to be carried out on the Venezuelan mainland. And so why is this all happening? It's because China has incredible influence in Venezuela. China, Beijing specifically, is Venezuela's #1 capital investor. And by that, I mean China has cleverly been loaning Venezuela $60 billion since the year 2007. They now effectively own Venezuela as a country and as a government. And Venezuela is very oil rich, like I covered in that first segment, where Trump clearly knows Venezuela has oil and is clearly using the war on drugs as a front, possibly to move on Venezuela's oil. But he's not just moving on Venezuela's oil out of pure American oil lust and greed like we've seen in the Middle East all those years ago. He's doing it to hurt China because Venezuela only has one real means of paying back China, paying back Beijing specifically, on the $60 billion that Beijing has been loaning them since 2007. And that's with oil. On top of that, Venezuela is not a popular country in the world. They have been sanctioned into oblivion. And countries want nothing to do with Venezuela. China is the only country, pretty much, that would have Venezuela, along with Iran, but Iran is linked with China. And so what winds up happening here is because Venezuela owes Beijing so much money, and because Beijing and China are really the only major superpower willing to deal with Venezuela, they hamstring Venezuela. And they force Venezuela to pay them back using oil, but to also sell them the oil way cheaper than they should be. Way below market cost. And this is just so incredibly ingenious, in all honesty, on China's part, because now not only are they milking Venezuela's oil reserves dry by holding the $60 billion of debt over Venezuela's head, but they're also ensuring that they can continue to milk Venezuela's oil dry at the cheapest possible cost, which means Venezuela, truthfully, can never fully repay Beijing China the $60 billion back because they have to sell Beijing China the oil at a super cheap cost. It is a lethal combination happening there, and it's all happening dangerously close to America. You see, many people look at Nicolas Maduro as the leader of Venezuela, but truthfully, it's Xi Jinping. And with their power over Venezuela, China literally views the entire country of Venezuela as the new front lines because of its close proximity to America in their shadow war with the United States. And this is a shadow war we all know is happening currently. And because of this, China is not only ripping off the entire country of Venezuela for their oil, but they're also investing in the ports and telecom infrastructures in Venezuela. And before the liberals can make the argument even that, well, the Chinese might just be developing those ports for Chinese fishermen, right? Absolutely not. That's not how China does business, actually. With their corporations, their businesses, all of their infrastructure, they only allow it on a national scale if those corporations, businesses, and infrastructures, etc., can be used in duality, not just by Chinese nationals and citizens, but by the Chinese military as well. And I could easily see it be adopted as their strategy, as a spit in the face to the stupid American liberal media, where they develop these ports in Venezuela, and they do put out a couple of commercial fishing vessels. Why wouldn't they? But the fact of the matter is, every port that they develop in Venezuela is a secret Chinese military port. And so with all of that knowledge and information being put out there now, I hope it's very clear to you what is actually going on in this country and in this armed conflict between the United States and Venezuela. The war on drugs is the most superficial reason, and alone is still a decent enough of a reason, in my opinion, for Trump to be blowing up the boats. I'm okay with that. But the real nitty-gritty of all of this, the real deeper reason behind all of this is purely Chinese influence. It's no different than why Trump wanted to take back control of the Panama Canal. Because what did the people of Panama do? They broke their agreement from all those years ago and started selling the canal to China. And we cannot allow that. And this ties back to the Monroe Doctrine, of course, and why we're now seeing the Donroe Doctrine. It is vital. And in this instance particularly, Trump is playing chess, truthfully. He really is. And he's doing it correctly. And he's doing it to protect America. We cannot allow Chinese influence to persist in Venezuela. And I personally would view it as an ultimate win, in fact, where Trump demonstrates the military might of America, intimidates China, coerces them almost into leaving the country or into having less to do with them. And politically, we could make maneuvers where we are the ones that benefit from Venezuela, as we should be, because they are an American country, a South American one maybe, Nevertheless, they're on our Western hemisphere that the Monroe Doctrine clearly states is our realm, our backyard, not China's. And so over time, I would like to see it where we swoop in and America, the United States of America, gains control of that oil, because every empire needs to constantly be accumulating resources. So I'm all in favor of it. That's what's really happening here. And that's why Trump's new national security strategy is so important and so beneficial to America in general. This is the truth that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this in the comments down below.